Part 1. When Dragons Meet. Chapter 1. The golden throne room of the Celestial Empire stretched endlessly before Emperor Zhao Lintian, its pillars carved with dragons that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. Red silk banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, each bearing the phoenix crest that had ruled these lands for 3 generations. But tonight, the magnificent hall felt more like a tomb than a seat of power. Lintian's fingers gripped the dragon-carved armrests of his throne, knuckles white beneath its jade rings. At 28, he commanded respect that made grown generals tremble, his presence alone enough to silence a room of 1,000 men. His black hair was bound with a golden crown, and his imperial robes, deep crimson silk embroidered with thread of actual gold, spoke of wealth that could buy kingdoms. Yet none of that mattered now. "Your Majesty," General Wei Zong knelt before the throne, his armor dented and bloodstained. The man who had conquered 7 provinces now looked like a broken sparrow. The eastern border, it has fallen. Silence crashed to the hall like thunder. The court ministers, dressed in their finest silk robes, suddenly found the marble floor fascinating. Even the guards, statues still in their ceremonial armor, seemed to hold their breath. Lintian's voice, when it came, was deadly quiet. "Explain." "The Crimson Blade sect sent only one man, Your Majesty. One!" General Wei's voice cracked. "Cultivator Ming Hao Ran. He moved like lightning given form. My 10,000 soldiers, our best formations, our siege weapons, nothing touched them. He carved through our ranks like we were wheat before the scythe." The Emperor's dark eyes flashed with something between fury and disbelief. One man defeated the Eastern army. He commanded the very elements, Your Majesty, fire that burned without fuel, wind that cut like steel. When he raised his sword, the earth itself cracked beneath his feet. Our arrows turned to dust before they reached him. Our swords shattered against his skin as if you were made of diamond. Minister Chen, an elderly man whose wisdom had guided 3 emperors, stepped forward with trembling hands. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider tribute. The Crimson Blade sect has made their demands clear. They want the western provinces and—" "No!" The word exploded from Lintian's throat like a dragon's roar, echoing off the golden walls. He rose from his throne, and every person in the room instantly took a step back. At 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad from years of sword training, the young emperor commanded attention even without his crown. His black hair was bound with a golden crown, and his imperial robes, deep crimson silk embroidered with thread of actual gold, spoke of wealth that could buy kingdoms. Yet none of that mattered now. "There is one option, Your Majesty." The voice came from the shadows near the great pillars. Master Li, Court's an olden advisor, emerged like a ghost in great robes. His beard was white as winter snow, and his eyes held the weight of decades, though it is unconventional. Linton's gaze snapped to the old advisor. "Speak!" "In the whispering mountain range beyond the valley of eternal mist, there is a sect, the Heavenly Sword Sect. They say its leader—" He paused as if the words themselves were dangerous. "They say he's unrivaled under heaven, that even other sect leaders dare not speak his name too loudly. And he is called the Immortal Blade. Some say he has lived for centuries. Others claim he can split mountains with a glance. The cultivation world speaks of him in whispers, partly from fear, partly from awe." Master Li's voice dropped even lower. "But Your Majesty, he bows to no earthly ruler, ever." The throne room fell silent except for the soft crackling of torches. Lintian stared at the old advisor for a long moment, his mind racing. To seek help from a cultivator, it went against everything he believed. Emperors commanded, emperors did not beg. But his empire was dying. "What do you know of this Immortal Blade?" Master Li looked uncomfortable. "Very little, Your Majesty. The Heavenly Sword Sect accepts no visitors. They trade with no merchants. Some say his leader is beautiful as the spring morning. Others claim he's terrible as winter's end.
all agree on one thing. He is proud beyond measure and cares nothing for mortal politics. General Wei struggled to his feet, wincing from his wound. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be considering he might kill you on sight. These cultivators see us as insects. Lintian turned back to his throne but did not sit. Instead, he stared up at the golden ceiling where painted dragons danced among painted clouds. Once Malin had laughed and said those dragons looked lonely, flying endlessly with no one to chase. How many days to reach this heavenly sword sect? Your Majesty, several voices protested at once. How many days? Master Li swallowed hard. 2 weeks through mountain paths, if the weather holds. But Your Majesty, the journey is perilous, and even if you survive the trip, there is no guarantee he will even see you, much less help you. Lintian was quiet for so long that some began to wonder if he'd heard. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute decision. Riding my horse, I leave at dawn. Chapter 2. The Whispering Mountains earned their name honestly, as Emperor Lintian guided his black stallion up the winding paths. The wind through the peaks sounded like voices, sharing secrets. Ancient pines clung to cliff faces that dropped into mist-shrouded valleys, and the air grew thin enough to make even his well-trained lungs work harder. He had been traveling for 10 days, and the solitude started to feel strange. For 28 years, he had never been truly alone. Always guards, always advisors, always someone watching his every move. Now dressed in simple dark robes instead of imperial silk, with his crown replaced by a plain hair tie, he almost felt like a different person. Almost. The path ahead split into 3 directions, each disappearing into fog so thick it seemed solid. Lintian pulled his horse to a stop and studied the ancient stone marker that stood at the crossroads. The writing was old-style characters, worn by centuries of weather. Left path, Valley of Singing Stones. Center path, the mortal's end. Right path, Haben's threshold. Well, I suppose we're now taking the center path. A sound made him freeze. Laughter, light, and musical coming from the mist itself. His hand went immediately to his sword hilt as he scanned the mist-shrouded walks. Mortals and would be quicker, but I admit less entertaining for me. Show yourself. Lintian's voice carried all the authority of his throne even here in the wilderness. More laughter, and then the mist began to swirl. It gathered and condensed until a figure stepped out of the fog, as if it was a doorway. Lintian's breath caught. The man who appeared was perhaps 30 years old, with long black hair that moves like silk in the mountain breeze. His robes were white as fresh snow, but clearly made of material finer than anything in Lintian's treasury. Silver thread traced patterns of clouds and swords across the fabric, and at his waist hung a blade that seemed to drink in the dim mountain light. But it was his face that made Lintian forget for just a moment that he was an emperor. Beautiful was too simple a word. The stranger's features were sharp and elegant, with high cheekbones and eyes that tilted slightly upward at the corners. His skin was pale as moonlight, and when he smiled, which he was doing now, was with the lazy confidence of someone who had never met an equal. "You must be lost," the stranger said, taking a step closer. His voice was smooth as aged wine and twice as intoxicating. "This pass leads only to the Heavenly Sword sect, and they don't welcome visitors. I seek the Immortal Blade. And what makes you think a mortal has anything to say that would interest him?" There was something in the way he said mortal, not quite mocking, but definitely amused. Lintian felt heat rise in his chest. He had conquered kingdoms, commanded armies, made kings kneel before his throne. He would not be dismissed by some mountain hermit, no matter how pretty.
I am Emperor Zhao Lintian of the Celestial Empire. My words have toppled dynasties and raised new ones. If this immortal blade is truly as powerful as the stories claim, then he will understand that power recognizes power. Emperor? The stranger laughed again, a sound like silver bells in the wind. How delicious! The little sovereign has come calling. Little sovereign? Lintian's eyes flashed dangerously. Watch your tongue, stranger. Emperor or not, I am still trained in the sword. Are you threatening me? The beautiful man took another step forward, and suddenly the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The fog around them began to swirl faster, and Lin Zhao could swear he heard the whisper of steel being drawn, though the stranger's blade remained sheathed. How adorable! Before Lin Zhao could react, the man moved. One moment he was standing beside the road, the next he was somehow beside Lin Zhao's horse, one pale hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword. Tell me, little sovereign, what makes you think you could even touch me? Lin Zhao's every instinct screamed danger. This was not a normal man. The way he moved, the way the very air seemed to bend around him, the casual display of speed that defied belief. But Lin Zhao had not conquered an empire by backing down from dangerous men. Instead of pulling away, he turned to meet those amused eyes directly. Because, he said quietly, I am not a normal mortal. And you, for all your pretty tricks, are curious enough about me to play games instead of simply killing me. For a moment, something flickered in the stranger's expression. Surprise? Interest? Then the lazy smile returned. Clever. Very well, little sovereign. I am intrigued enough to escort you the rest of the way. He stepped back and somehow appeared beside the road again, as if he had never moved at all. But I should warn you, the Immortal Blade does not suffer fools. Or emperors. And you know this how? The stranger's smile became absolutely wicked. Because, my dear little sovereign, I am him. Chapter 3. Lin Zhao stared at the man, the Immortal Blade, for a full 10 heartbeats. Then he threw back his head and laughed. It was not the reaction anyone expected. The Immortal Blade's eyebrows rose in surprise, and even the mountain Wayne seemed to pause. You find something amusing? The cultivator asked, and there was a dangerous edge to his voice now. I find it perfect, Lin Zhao said, still grinning. Of course, the most powerful cultivator under heaven would be arrogant enough to reveal himself just to see my reaction, and beautiful enough to make it interesting. The words hung in the thin mountain air. The Immortal Blade went very still, and Lin Zhao realized he might have just made a fatal mistake. Calling a man beautiful, especially a man who could probably level mountains, was not typically wise. But instead of anger, something else flickered across that perfect face. Interest. You're either very brave or very stupid, the Immortal Blade said softly. Both, usually. Lin Zhao dismounted from his horse and stood facing the cultivator. On the ground, the height difference was more obvious. The Immortal Blade had several inches on him and moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never known a moment of uncertainty. Will you hear my proposal? I already know what you want. The Crimson Blade sect is threatening your empire. You need someone strong enough to match their pet monster. The question is, what you think you can offer me in return. What do you want? Nothing you can give me, little sovereign. Try me. The Immortal Blade paused and looked back over his shoulder. I have lived for 200 years. I have wealth beyond counting, power beyond measure, and skills that make other cultivators weep with envy. What could a mortal emperor possibly offer me that I do not already possess? It was a fair question, and one Lin Zhao had been wrestling with for the entire journey. What do you offer a man who could take anything he wanted? A challenge, he said finally. This time the Immortal Blade stopped walking entirely. Explain. When was the last time someone surprised you? When was the last time you faced an opponent who made you uncertain of victory? When was the last time you met someone who looked at your power and didn't immediately fall to their knees? The cultivator turned around fully now, and his eyes were sharp as his legendary blade. You think you can challenge me? I think you're bored. Step closer. Close enough to see the faint silver collects in those dark eyes. If you're so tiresome, prove me wrong. Kill me right now. In the growing twilight, they stared at each other. Emperor and immortal, mortal pride facing celestial power. The mist swirled around them like curious spirits, and somewhere in the distance a nightbird called. Finally, the Immortal Blade laughed. But this time it was different.
genuine. You truly are either very brave or very stupid. He turned and continued up the path. Come, let me show you what you're asking me to fight for. The path wound higher into the mountains, through forests of bamboo that sang in the wind, and across bridges made of single stones that spanned impossible gaps. Lintian's horse picked its way carefully along routes that seemed more suited to mountain goats than mortals. But the Immortal Blade moved as if he were walking through a palace garden. What is your name? Lintian asked as we climbed. Your real name, not your title. The cultivator glanced back. Lin Zhao. And before you ask, yes, I know we share character in our names. The gods have an irritating sense of humor. Lin Zhao, Lintian repeated, testing the syllables. It was a beautiful name for a beautiful man. Dangerous thinking. Tell me about your empire, little sovereign. What makes it worth saving? It's not perfect. The nobles are sometimes corrupt, the people sometimes suffer, and I make mistakes that cost lives. But it's mine. I built it from a broken kingdom my father left me. Every law, every road, every school, I carved them from chaos and violence. And the people... I paused, remembering faces from his travels to the provinces. They trust me. They believe I will protect them. That belief is worth any price. Lin Zhao was quiet for a while. Then, your empress, the one who died, you loved her. It wasn't a question. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the old wound that never quite healed. Yes. And now you rule alone. Yes. By choice or by necessity? I considered lying, then decided not to. Something about this mountain air, or maybe the strange man beside me, made on this theme seem impossible. By choice. Love is a weakness I can't afford. Not again. How practical. There was something odd in Lin Zhao's voice. And lonely. Before Lintian could react, they crested a ridge and the heavenly sword stack spread out before them. It was the most beautiful place Lintian had ever seen. The sect was built into the living mountain itself, carved from white stone that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Graceful buildings rose in terraces up the cliff face, connected by bridges that looked like frozen waterfalls. Gardens hung in impossible places, filled with flowers that bloomed in defiance of the altitude and season. And everywhere was a soft sound of wind chimes and flowing water. Welcome, the Immortal Blade said, and his voice held a note of genuine pride. To my home.
Chapter 4. The great hall of the Heavenly Sword Sect made even Lintian's imperial palace look modest. The ceiling soared 50 feet overhead, supported by pillars carved to look like ascending dragons. The floor was polished black stone that reflected the light from hundreds of floating lanterns. Actual floating lanterns that drifted through the air without strings or supports. But it was the throne at the far end that made Lintian pause. It wasn't golden like his own. Instead, it was carved from a single piece of white jade, shaped like a lotus blossom in eternal bloom. Silver veins ran through the stone like captured lightning, and the whole thing seemed to radiate a soft, cool light. Do you like it? Lin Zhao asked, and there was something almost shy in the question. I carved it myself. Took me about 30 years to get it right. It's beautiful, Lintian said honestly, though I noticed it's built for one. Yes, well, I don't share power any more than you do. Lin Zhao moved to the throne and settled into it with fluent grace, immediately transforming from beautiful man into something altogether more dangerous. Here, in his own domain, surrounded by the symbols of his power, he looked every inch the immortal cultivator, who could split mountains. Now then, he said, and his voice echoed slightly in the vast space. Make your proposal, little sovereign. Convince me to risk my sect, my disciples, and myself for your empire. Lintian walked closer, stopping about 10 feet from the jade throne. This was the moment he had been preparing for during the entire journey, but now, faced with Lin Zhao's otherworldly beauty and casual display of power, his carefully planned speech felt inadequate. So instead, he spoke from the heart. The Crimson Blade sect will not stop with my empire. Men who taste that kind of power never do. Today it's my eastern provinces. Tomorrow it will be my capital. Next year, it will be your mountain.
He met Lin Zhao's gaze directly. Help me stop them now or face them alone later when they're stronger. A practical argument, he mused, but not a compelling one. I could simply relocate, find a new mountain. There are always other mountains. You could, Lintian agreed, but you won't. Oh, and why is that? Because you're not a coward. Lintian stepped closer and something flickered in Lin Zhao's eyes. You've spent 2 centuries building this place, training your disciples, perfecting your art. You won't run from some upstart sect with delusions of conquest. Your pride won't let you. Lin Zhao laughed, but it was sharp-edged now. My pride? What about yours, little sovereign? You came here, to my mountain, to beg for my help. Doesn't that wound your precious imperial dignity? Heat flashed through Lintian's chest. I didn't beg, I offered an alliance. Did you? It sounded rather like begging to me. Lin Zhao rose from his throne and began descending the steps slowly. The mighty emperor reduced to pleading with mountain hermits because his armies are useless. Each word was a perfectly aimed blade designed to cut deep. Lintian felt his temper rising, the same fury that had conquered kingdoms and cowed kings. But something made him pause. There was something in Lin Zhao's expression, something that didn't match his mocking words. He's trying to make me angry, Lintian said quietly. Am I succeeding? Yes, but not for the reason you think. Lin Zhao paused on the bottom step, now close enough that Lintian could smell the subtle scent of mountain flowers that seemed to cling to his robes. Enlighten me. You're trying to provoke me into storming out, because if I leave in anger, you don't have to make a decision. You don't have to choose between the safety of isolation and the risk of involvement. Lintian stepped closer, close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to meet those dark eyes. But I won't make it that easy for you. You think you know me so well after half a day? I think we're more alike than you want to admit. The words hung between them like a challenge. Lin Zhao was close enough now that Lintian could see the faint silver patterns embroidered into his robes, could count the individual lashes around those dark eyes. Alike. Lin Zhao's voice was barely above a whisper. How so? We're both proud, both lonely, both used to being the most dangerous person in any room. Lintian's voice dropped to match Lin Zhao's. And we both know that this conversation isn't really about my empire or your sect, isn't it? No, it's about the fact that you're curious about me and I'm... Lintian stopped himself just in time. You're what, little sovereign? The question was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. They were standing close enough now that Lintian could feel the warmth radiating from Lin Zhao's body, could see the way those perfect lips curved and something that wasn't quite a smile. This was insane. He had come here for military aid, not to lose himself in the dark eyes of a man that could kill him with a thought. He had sworn never to let anyone hold power over him again, never to risk his heart on something as unreliable as attraction. But Mei Lin was safe, sweet, predictable. Lin Zhao was none of those things. I should go, Lintian said, but he didn't move. Yes, Lin Zhao agreed, but he didn't step back either. You should. They stared at each other in the flickering light of the floating lanterns, 2 proud men balanced on the edge of something that could destroy them both. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Lin Zhao smiled. Really smiled, not his usual mocking expression, and the tension broke like a snapped bowstring. But first, he said, stepping back and giving Lintian room to breathe, let me show you what you're asking me to fight beside. He moved to the center of the hall and drew his sword in one fluent motion. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, literally sank, a pure note that hung in the air like music. The steel was unlike anything Lintian had ever seen, seeming to be made from captured moonlight rather than metal. This is Kyanggun, Lin Zhao said, holding the sword up to catch the lantern light. Sky clear. It was forged from fallen stars and quenched in dragons' tears. There are perhaps 3 blades in all the world that could match it. Then he began to move. It wasn't fighting. There was no opponent, no target. It was pure art, a dance of death so beautiful that Lin Tian's chest tightened. Lin Zhao flowed through forms that had no names, his white robes billowing round him like clouds, his dark hair streaming behind him like a banner. The sword cut through the air with those crystalline notes, and where it passed, the very space seemed to shimmer. This wasn't just skill. This was power beyond mortal understanding, grace beyond human capability. When Lin Zhao finally came to rest, returning Kyunggun to its sheath with a whisper of steel, Lin Tian found that he had forgotten to breathe. "Well?" Lin Zhao asked, and there was something almost shy in the question. "What do you think?" Lin Tian looked at this impossible man, beautiful as a painting, deadly as winter, proud as a mountain peak, and made a decision that would change everything. "I think I want to spar with you," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon? You want to know what I can offer you that you don't already have? A real opponent, someone who might actually make you work for victory, unless you're afraid a mere mortal might embarrass you." The challenge hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. Lin Zhao stared at him for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed with genuine delight. "Oh, little sovereign, you are going to be such an interesting fun to break." Chapter 5. The clang of steel on steel echoed through the great hall like temple bells. Lin Tian's sword met Kyunggun in a shower of sparks, and the force of the impact sent him sliding back across the polished stone floor. Lin Zhao hadn't even seemed to try. "Is that the best the Emperor can do?" the immortal asked, spinning his blade in a lazy circle. "I'm almost disappointed."
Lin Tian wiped blood from his split lip and grinned. "I'm just getting started." He attacked again, this time using the speed and precision that had made him famous in a dozen wars. His blade wove a silver web in the air, each strike aimed for a vital point, each movement flowing into the next like water. Lin Zhao parried every attack without appearing to move, his sword intercepting Lin Tian's strikes with casual elegance. But there was something in his eyes now, a spark of genuine interest. "Better," he murmured, then suddenly went on the offensive. If Lin Zhao fought like water, Lin Zhao fought like lightning. His sword moved so fast it seemed to be in 3 places at once, and only Lin Tian's desperate speed kept him from being cut to ribbons. The immortal drove him back across the hall, white robes flowing around him like wings, dark hair streaming behind him like a war banner. But Lin Tian had not conquered an empire by being easy to defeat. As Lin Zhao pressed forward, the emperor began to read his patterns, to see the microscopic tells that preceded each attack. When the next strike came, a thrust aimed at his heart, Lin Tian twisted aside and brought his own blade around in a cutting arc that would have opened Lin Zhao's throat. Would have, if Lin Zhao had been there to receive it. Instead, the immortal seemed to flow like mist, appearing behind Lin Tian with his sword already moving. Only a desperate roll saved the emperor from being skewered, and he came up with his robes torn and his dignity in tatters. "Interesting," Lin Zhao said, not even breathing hard. "You adapt quickly. Most mortals would be dead 3 times over by now." "Most mortals," Lin Tian panted, "aren't emperors." They circled each other like wolves, feet whisper soft on the stone floor. Lin Tian could feel sweat running down his back, could taste blood and adrenaline. His entire body screamed that he was outmatched, that he was facing something far beyond mortal capability. But he had never felt more alive. "Tell me something, little sovereign," Lin Zhao said as they moved. "What happens when you lose? Will you crawl back to your empire empty-handed? Will you kneel and beg me to reconsider?" "I won't lose. Everyone loses eventually. Not me, not tonight." Lin Zhao's smile turned sharp as his blade. Such confidence. "Let's test it." The immortal exploded into motion, and suddenly the air itself seemed to sing with the passage of his sword. This wasn't the casual sparring of before. This was Lin Zhao actually trying,
his movements almost too fast to follow, his blade leaving trails of silver light in the air. Lintian fell back, parrying desperately, his own sword work reduced to pure survival. But as the immortal pressed his attack, something strange happened. The Emperor's movements began to change, becoming fluid and instinctive in a way that surprised them both. It was as if his body was learning to move like Lin Zhao's, adapting to the immortal's impossible speed and grace. His sword began to sing, too, not with magic, but with perfect technique and absolute commitment. When Lin Zhao's next thrust came, Lintian didn't try to block it. Instead, he flowed around it like water around a stone, his own blade snaking out to trace a line of red across the immortal's perfect cheek. Both men froze. A single drop of blood, dark as rubies, rolled down Lin Zhao's face and fell to the stone floor with an audible splash. In the sudden silence, they stared at each other with something approaching shock. "You cut me," Lin Zhao said, softly touching his fingers to the wound. "You actually cut me." Lintian was breathing hard, his sword still raised, his body coiled for the next attack. "I told you, I don't lose." For a moment, neither moved. Then Lin Zhao began to laugh. Not his usual mocking sound, but something rich and genuine and delighted. "Magnificent! Absolutely magnificent! Do you know how long it's been since anyone drew my blood in combat? 60 years, little sovereign! 60 years since I felt the sting of steel against my skin." He lowered Qingyun and moved closer, and there was something in his eyes that made Lintian's pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with combat. "You realize," Lin Zhao said quietly, "that this changes everything? Does it?" "Oh yes." The immortal reached out and touched Lintian's face, his pale fingers cool against Lintian's flushed skin. "I had planned to refuse you, to send you back to your empire with pretty words and empty promises. But now... Lin Zhao's thumb brushed across Lintian's lower lip, and Lintian felt something hot and dangerous uncoil in his chest. "I find myself intrigued. It has been so long since I met someone who could surprise me, someone who could make me feel... Feel what? Alive." The word hung between them like a bridge over a chasm. Dangerous to cross, impossible to ignore. Lintian found himself leaning into the touch, drawn by the promise of warmth in those dark eyes. This was madness. He barely knew this man. Lin Zhao was powerful enough to destroy armies, proud enough to scorn emperors, beautiful enough to make angels weep with envy. Getting involved with him would be like trying to hold lightning in his bare hands. But when Lin Zhao leaned closer, close enough that their breath mingled in the space between them, Lintian didn't pull away. "Your sect leader?" A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Your sect leader, there are urgent... Oh..." A young woman in the white and silver robes of the sect stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Lin Zhao and Lintian, standing close enough to kiss, both disheveled from combat, the air between them crackling with unspoken possibilities. Lin Zhao stepped back smoothly, his expression shifting back to cool composure so quickly that Lintian almost wondered if he had imagined the heat in those dark eyes. "Disciple Mei," Lin Zhao said, his voice perfectly controlled, "what is so urgent that you forget to knock?" The young woman, barely 20 with bright eyes and nervous energy, bowed deeply. "Forgive me, sect leader, but there are visitors from the Crimson Blade sect." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lin Qian's hand moved instinctively to Qingyun's hilt, and Lintian felt his own battle instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. "How many?" Lin Zhao asked, his voice deadly calm. 3, sect leader. They say they come under a flag of truce, but..." She glanced uncertainly at Lin Qian. They're asking specifically about the Emperor. They followed me, Lintian said. They followed me. Impossible, Lin Zhao said, but there was doubt in his voice. No one can track someone through the Whispering Mountains without... He stopped, his eyes widening. Unless they used blood-tracking techniques. The battle, Lintian said grimly. General Wei bled all over the field. They could have taken anything.
This complicates matters considerably. Lin Zhao began pacing, his white robe swirling around him. If they know you're here, they'll assume we're already allies, which means you're already a target whether you help me or not, Lin Tian finished. Precisely. Lin Zhao stopped pacing and looked at the Emperor with something that might have been respect. You're more clever than you look, little sovereign. Despite everything, Lin Tian felt his lips quirk upward. I'll try not to be insulted by that. Disciple Mei, Lin Zhao said, turning to the young woman, where are these visitors now? In the guest pavilion, sect leader. Elder Chen is keeping them entertained, but they seem impatient. I imagine they do. Lin Zhao moved to a wall hanging and pushed it aside, revealing a hidden alcove containing several sets of robes. He pulled out a set in midnight blue and tossed them to Lin Tian. Change. If they see you in travel clothes, they'll know exactly how desperate your situation is.
Lin Tian caught the robes and raised an eyebrow.
These are silk.
Yes, well, I don't keep anything cheap in my sect. Lin Zhao selected a new set for himself. These pure white with silver dragons embroidered along the sleeves. Image is everything when dealing with other cultivators. Show weakness once, and they'll remember it forever. As they changed, Lin Tian turning away for modesty, Lin Zhao showing no such concern, the Emperor found his mind racing. The Crimson Blade sect's arrival could be coincidence, but he doubted it, which meant his presence here had put Lin Zhao in immediate danger. I should leave, he said quietly. Draw them away from your sect. Don't be stupid. Lin Zhao finished tying his new robes and turned to study Lin Tian's appearance. They're already here. Leaving now would just confirm their suspicions and make you look weak in the bargain. He reached out and adjusted the collar of Lin Tian's borrowed robes, his fingers brushing against the Emperor's throat. Besides, I'm curious to meet the pets of the Crimson Blade sect. These aren't pets, Lin Tian warned, if they're anything like the one who destroyed my army. Then we'll find out just how well the Emperor fights beside an immortal instead of against one. Lin Zhao's smile was sharp as winter wind. Stay close to me, little sovereign, and try not to let them see how terrified you are. I'm not. Of course you are. Only an idiot wouldn't be terrified. Lin Zhao headed for the door, then paused and looked back. But terror can be useful if you know how to hide it. Come, let's go meet our uninvited guests. The guest pavilion of the Heavenly Sword sect was a masterpiece of understated elegance, but the three men waiting there looked like vipers in a garden. They wore robes of deep red silk, marked with black sword designs, and each radiated dangerous energy that made the air itself feel heavy. The leader was a thin man with cruel eyes and prematurely white hair. When he saw Lin Tian, his smile turned predatory. "Your Majesty," he said with mock courtesy, "how fortuitous to find you here. I am Elder Zhao of the Crimson Blade sect." Lin Tian stepped forward, letting imperial authority settle around him like armor. "And I'm curious why members of a foreign sect are so interested in my movements." "We have a message from our sect leader," Elder Zhao said, his eyes glittering with malice. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Continue this foolish resistance, and we will make your empire burn for days before we finally grant you the mercy of ending." But Lin Zhao began to laugh. It was something darker, more dangerous, the sound of a predator that had just been offered prey. "How delightful," he purred, and suddenly the air in the pavilion felt charged with electricity. "It's been far too long since someone threatened guests in my home." The confrontation that followed was a dance of words and veiled threats, but Lin Tian could see the outcome in Lin Zhao's eyes. When Elder Zhao finally made his offer, protection for the sect in exchange for neutrality, Lin Zhao's response was swift and final. "My answer is no."
I will not stand aside while you burn empires. I will not ignore threats made under my own roof, and I will certainly not abandon a guest who has earned my protection. Earned my protection. The word sent something warm shooting through Lintian's chest. After the Crimson Blade cultivators laughed with their dignity barely intact, Lintian found himself alone with Lin Zhao in the quiet pavilion. You didn't have to do that, Lintian said quietly. Do what? Declare yourself my ally? You could have remained neutral. Lin Zhao moved closer, and there was something predatory in the way he approached. Little sovereign, you give yourself far too much credit. I made that choice because I wanted to. Because for the first time in decades, someone offered me something interesting. A war? A challenge. Lin Zhao reached out and touched Lintian's throat with gentle fingers. Tell me, how does it feel to have an immortal as your ally? The touch sent fire racing through Lintian's veins. Terrifying, he admitted. Good. Terror keeps you sharp. Lin Zhao's thumb brushed along Lintian's jaw. We should return to the main hall. There are plans to make, strategies to discuss, preparations for war. Yes, Lintian agreed, but neither moved. They stood in the filtered light, Emperor and Immortal, surrounded by the promise of war and the whisper of something deeper. The air between them hummed with dangerous possibilities. Lintian said softly, Yes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, little sovereign. Before this is over, you may curse the day you climbed my mountain. I doubt that. Do you? Even if I told you that I have history with the Crimson Blade sect. What kind of history? The kind that makes this war personal. Come, we have much to discuss and very little time to discuss it in. As they walked back toward the main hall, Lintian couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped onto a battlefield where the rules were written in languages he didn't understand. But for the first time since his empire had been crumbling around him, he wasn't facing the fight alone. Even if his ally was the most dangerous, beautiful, complicated man he had ever met. Even if that man clearly was hiding secrets that could change everything. Even if Lintian was beginning to suspect that the greatest threat to his heart was not the Crimson Blade sect, but the immortal walking beside him with silver moonlight caught in his dark hair and promises of war dancing in his eyes like stars. End of part 1. To be continued in part 2.
Appreciate you watching. Hit subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next story.